Keanu was staring at his phone like it was some kind of bomb, the tiny cursor blinking in an unsent message that he had rewritten at least 20 times. The room around him was quiet in that heavy way expensive places can be. Soft lights, polished wood, city lights bleeding in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside his chest, it was chaos. It had been years since Speed, years since those long days on set when he and Sandra had laughed so hard between takes that the crew had to wait for them to stop crying. Years since late-night conversations in trailers about fear, about fame, about the weird loneliness that comes with having your face on billboards. And all that time, there had been one thing he'd never said out loud, not once, not even when she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, trusting him completely. He could still hear her laugh from that first reading, nervous, trying to hide behind her jokes, but impossibly warm. He remembered how she had brought extra coffee for the crew on cold mornings, how she'd stay behind to ask the sound guy about his kids, how she'd quietly slip a jacket over the shoulders of a background actor who was shivering in between takes. Fame had already started to tighten around both of them like an invisible rope, but she had kept looking outward, asking, "You okay?" to everyone else instead of herself. For him, who had already tasted grief and loss that the tabloids would never fully understand, that kindness was like someone cracking a window in a room with no air. And somewhere between pretending to save her in an exploding bus and sharing bad takeout on a folding chair, he had fallen for her, slowly, stubbornly, and completely. He had buried it back then, like an actor hitting his mark. She was in a relationship. Then he was. Then their careers took them in different directions. There was always a reason to wait. Another project. Another city. Another moment that seemed almost right but not quite. Timing, people said in interviews, smiling in that practiced Hollywood way. But timing had been cruel to both of them. He'd lost people he loved suddenly, violently, the kind of losses that made him question what tomorrow even meant. She had gone through her own storms, public heartbreaks, private disappointments, those quiet nights when she wondered if she had bet on the wrong people. And every now and then, their paths would cross again on some red carpet or event, and they'd hug just a little too long, ask, "How are you, really?" and then float back into their separate orbits like two planets trapped by different gravities. Tonight, though, something had shifted. Maybe it was the silence after another long day pretending to be someone else. Maybe it was the memory of her face in that old interview where she half-jokingly admitted she had a crush on him back in the Speed days, her eyes dropping, that embarrassed smile she only did when she meant more than she was saying. Or maybe it was the simple, brutal math of time. How many chances had already been wasted? He thought of all the people he'd loved who never got a goodbye, all the words that never made it out of his mouth, and he felt this sharp, almost physical ache. What if I go my whole life never telling her the truth? Courage, he'd learned, wasn't just jumping off buildings for a stunt. Sometimes it was sending a single sentence you were terrified to see on someone else's screen. His thumb hovered over the keyboard, and he read the message again, silently mouthing the words like a confession. "Sandy, I know this might be strange after all this time, but there's something I never told you back then. I was in love with you. I probably still am." The honesty of it scared him. No jokes, no mask, no safe half-truths. Just the raw, human mess of what he really felt. What if it ruined the friendship that had survived decades and distance? What if she laughed it off to protect him? What if she said nothing at all? The Keanu the world thought they knew, the calm one, the zen-like one, the guy who could walk through chaos with quiet grace, felt like a stranger compared to the man sitting here now, heart pounding like a teenager before his first confession. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could face explosions, fight scenes, and paparazzi chaos, but this little blue send button felt like the most dangerous stunt of his life. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a breath, remembering one of their oldest conversations. It was late, the set almost empty, the city humming quietly outside. She'd said, "You ever get tired of pretending you're not scared?" He'd smiled back then and dodged the question with a philosophical quote. Tonight, he finally whispered an answer to the empty room. "Yeah, I do." His thumb pressed down before he could talk himself out of it. The message flew off into the digital void, and for an instant he felt weightless, like someone who had just jumped and was waiting to find out if there was water below or concrete. There was no going back now. No edit. No reshoot. No second take. Just two people and a truth that had been delayed for far too long. The phone vibrated in his hand almost immediately, the screen lighting up with her name, and his breath caught halfway in his throat, because instead of a new message, he saw something else, an incoming call from Sandra. He stared at the screen, his thumb trembling above the green button, knowing that whatever he heard in her voice next might change everything he thought he understood about their story. He answered on the fourth ring, not because he wanted to make her wait, but because he needed those extra 3 seconds to hold himself together. "Hey, Sandy," he said, and his voice came out softer than he expected, that familiar gentleness he always slipped into when it was just the two of them. For a heartbeat, all he heard was quiet on the other end, the faint murmur of a television in the background, a dog's collar jingling. Then her voice came, low and careful, nothing like the bright, effortless charm the world was used to. "Keanu, did you mean to send me that?" she asked, and every word sounded like it had been chosen with trembling fingers. There was no teasing, no nervous laugh to cushion it. Just raw vulnerability. He leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling like it might offer a script. "Yeah," he said after a moment, forcing himself not to run from it now. "I did." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with all the unsaid years, the stolen glances on set, the almosts and maybes they had buried under schedules and circumstances. For a second, he wanted to apologize, to tell her she could forget it, but he stopped himself. He'd lived too many years apologizing for his own heart. On the other end, she let out a small, shaky laugh that wasn't happy. Exactly. More like someone opening a door they'd kept locked for too long. "You really know how to pick a Tuesday night, don't you?" she murmured. He could picture her perfectly, barefoot, hair up in a loose knot, makeup removed, one hand pressed to her forehead as if she could physically hold back the wave of memories crowding in. She paused, drawing a long breath. "I read it, and my first thought was, of course. Of course he waited 20+ years to say this like a true emotionally responsible ninja." Her joke was familiar and warm, but it trembled at the edges. He smiled despite himself. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he said quietly. "I was scared." And then life kept happening. "You're not the only one who was scared," she said softly, and those words cut through him. He could hear something fragile there, something that made his chest tighten. "You know, people always ask me about speed," she went on, her voice drifting, like she was watching their younger selves from a distance. "They ask if we had a thing, if there was something between us." She laughed again, but there was no audience now, no cameras, just the two of them and the truth. "I always say, no, we were just respectful. Too respectful. And they think I'm being cute. But what I really mean is, I was a coward too. I liked you so much it scared me. So I buried it under work and nonsense and the wrong men." He shifted forward, elbows on his knees, the city lights blurring in his peripheral vision. "Sandy," he whispered, and the ache in his voice surprised even him. He'd imagined this conversation so many ways over the years, her laughing it off, her saying she'd never felt that way, or worse, her not answering at all. But this quiet honesty hurt in a different way. Why didn't you ever say anything? The question slipped out before he could soften it. It didn't come from accusation, but from years of wondering if he had misread everything. Because you were you, she said, the words full of a complicated tenderness. You were this incredibly kind, thoughtful, almost painfully decent man in a town full of the opposite. I didn't want to be another thing you had to worry about. I saw how much you'd already lost. I watched you carry grief like a suitcase you never put down. Her voice thickened. I was terrified I'd love you more than you could afford to lose again. And then, every time I thought, maybe now, something terrible happened in your life or in mine, and it just felt cruel to add that to the pile. So I pretended I was fine. I pretended it was just friendship. And I got really good at pretending. He closed his eyes, feeling the sting behind them. This was the part no one ever saw, the way kindness could turn into a cage, the way two people trying to protect each other ended up hurting themselves. You were never a burden to me, he said, the words rough but steady. You were the light in a lot of very dark rooms, Sandy. I don't think you ever realized that. He swallowed, his throat tight. Every time I saw you, even for 5 minutes, something in me reset. Like, okay, the world is still capable of producing someone like her. Maybe it's not all broken. He wasn't trying to be poetic. He was just finally telling the truth. On the line, he heard her sniff quietly, and then she exhaled in that way people do when they're trying not to cry. You always do that, she murmured. You say something that's going to haunt me in the best and worst way. A beat passed. But, Keanu, why now? Why tonight? After everything. After everyone. Why choose this moment to hand me this piece of your heart? He wished he had an easy answer, something that sounded wise or tidy. But there was only the messy reality of it. Because I got tired of imagining your life without me in it in a real way, he said. I got tired of replaying all the times I stayed quiet and wondering if that was my biggest mistake. I don't know what I expect. I'm not asking you to uproot anything. I couldn't go another year knowing you exist in this world and never telling you how much you mean to me. Not as an interview soundbite. Not as a joke. For real. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. I needed you to know the truth, even if it complicates everything. Even if it changes nothing. A long, deep silence followed, and he could almost hear her wrestling with something on the other end. Old ghosts and new fears crowding together. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, lower, steadier, but carrying a weight he hadn't heard from her before. If we'd said this back then, she said slowly, everything about my life would be different right now. I don't know if it would be better or worse, but I know it would not be this. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a tired honesty. I have a son sleeping upstairs. I have responsibilities. I have scars I'm still figuring out how to live with. I'm not that girl on the bus anymore, Keanu. I'm harder in some places, softer in others. She hesitated. And I'm terrified of wanting something that might not fit in the life I fought so hard to build. He felt those words like a physical weight. He'd spent years learning to live beside his own pain, making peace with a life that didn't look anything like the one he once imagined. I understand, he said, and he meant it. I don't want to break anything in your world. I just didn't want to leave this unspoken and pretend it was never there. You deserve honesty, even if it's late. Especially if it's late. He forced a faint, self-aware smile into his tone. You don't owe me anything. Not an answer, not a decision. I just Wanted you to have the whole picture. There was a rustle on the other end, like she'd stood up, started pacing. When she spoke again, the vulnerability in her voice was sharper, more exposed. But that's the thing, she said. You don't drop something like that and expect nothing back. You know me better than that. She let out a shaky breath. Because the truth is, there's something I never told you either. Something that might make this a lot more complicated than you think. She stopped, and in that tiny pause, his heart thudded painfully. He leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter, every nerve suddenly on high alert. The city outside felt a million miles away. In that moment, there was only her voice, and the years between them collapsing into a fragile, dangerous present. "What didn't you tell me?" he asked, his words barely above a whisper. On the other end of the line, Sandra's answer caught in her throat. When she finally began to speak, her confession started with 4 simple words that he never expected to hear from her. 4 words that would turn everything he thought he understood about their past completely upside down. "I was in love," she said, and at first he thought she was about to tell him some half-forgotten story about someone else, another man, another almost. But then she finished the sentence, the last word landing with the weight of all their wasted time. "With you. Back then. During speed. After speed. For longer than I will ever publicly admit." Her voice broke on a quiet, humorless laugh. "And apparently I'm still the same idiot, because my heart just did that stupid thing when your text came in. At this age. In this life. With this much history. It still jumped." He didn't speak. Couldn't. For years, he had built an entire narrative around the idea that his feelings were this private, noble secret, something he carried out of respect, out of timing, out of fear. He had watched old clips of them on talk shows where the host would prod, "Come on, was there anything there?" And she'd make a joke, and he'd deflect, and the audience would laugh. And now, with a handful of raw, unpolished words over a phone line, that whole story cracked open. "You loved me," he managed finally, his voice hoarse. He said it not like a man fishing for flattery, but like someone touching an old wound and realizing it had always been bone deep. "Yeah," she said simply, and the simplicity hurt more than any elaborate confession could. "I loved you in that ridiculous, quiet way where you learn a person's coffee order before your own. Where you can tell how bad their day's been by the way they hold their shoulders. Where you pretend you're fine when the director rearranges a scene so you don't have to be as close, and for some reason that ruins your whole week." She sighed, the sound full of old exhaustion. "I loved you while watching you fall in love with other people and telling myself that was enough. That being the safe friend on the sidelines was some kind of moral high ground. It wasn't. It was self-protection dressed up as kindness." Images flooded him. Her walking onto set in the early morning chill, that lopsided grin when she saw him, the way she'd throw a casual hand on his arm, then pull back a little too quickly, like she'd remembered some unspoken rule. At the time he had chalked it up to nerves, to work, to professionalism. Now, those tiny hesitations felt like clues he'd willfully ignored. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked again, but now the words came out softer, less like a demand and more like a bewildered whisper. "If we were both there, why did we stay standing on opposite sides of the same line?" "Because I watched you, Keanu," she said, and there was an ache in her tone that told him she'd thought about this 1,000 times too. "I watched you grieve. I watched you get that faraway look in your eyes when you thought no one was paying attention. I watched you fall quiet at parties when people started talking about love like it was casual, disposable. And I thought, if I step into that space, if I make him carry my heart on top of everything else he's already carrying, and then I screw it up, what if I'm one more weight that breaks him?" She paused, voice trembling. I couldn't stand the idea that I might be another loss you'd have to survive. He ran a hand over his face, his jaw tight. You know what's crazy? He said after a long moment. I was thinking the same thing about you. I watched you go through those public breakups, those headlines that reduced you to some punchline about bad choices. I saw how hard you fought to protect that happy, goofy version of yourself. And I thought, if I tell her I'm in love with her, and she doesn't feel the same, what if I take that light away? What if I make it harder for her to be her? So I stayed quiet, thinking I was being noble. He gave a dry, self-deprecating laugh. Turns out we were just two cowards in very flattering costumes. She chuckled softly, but the sound dissolved quickly. Do you remember that night in your trailer? She asked. The last week of shooting Speed? The studio had sent champagne. Everyone was talking about the wrap party, the future, the next big thing. And we were just sitting there on that terrible couch, eating cold noodles out of a carton. He nodded instinctively, the memory unfolding in full color. Her feet curled under her, hair pulled back, makeup half worn off, eyes shining from exhaustion and something tender he hadn't dared name. You said, she continued, that sometimes you felt like life kept putting you on moving vehicles just to see if you could stay standing. That you were always bracing for the next impact. He remembered saying it, half as a joke, half as a confession. He remembered the way she'd looked at him afterward, so open, so full of an emotion that scared him. You told me, he said softly, wandering back into that night, that if the bus ever actually exploded, you'd want to be sitting next to me, because you trusted I'd at least hold your hand. His throat tightened. It had sounded like friendly banter then, something to break the heaviness. Now, in hindsight, it sounded like a woman whispering, pick me. Choose me. I'm right here. Yeah, she breathed. That was the night I almost said it. Almost told you everything. I had the words right there. My heart was pounding like I'd run a marathon on that fake bus. And then your agent called. And you took the call. And suddenly they were talking about your next movie, your flight, your whole future, and I thought, he's already in motion. I'm just another stop. So I swallowed it. I smiled. I made some stupid joke. And I walked out of that trailer feeling like I'd just tossed my own heart into the trash can along with the noodles. He let the silence sit between them, honoring it. There was so much regret in the air it almost felt like a third person in the conversation, breathing with them, reminding them of everything timing had stolen. We were so determined not to be each other's burden, he said eventually, that we forgot we might have been each other's home. The line went quiet again, and for a moment he worried he'd pushed too far, said something that broke whatever fragile balance they'd found. When she replied, her voice had shifted. It was quieter, but steadier, lined with a kind of hard-won self-knowledge. Maybe, she said. Or maybe we would have crashed and burned. Maybe we would have dated for 6 months, broken up, and then avoided each other at award shows for the rest of our lives. She blew out a breath. That's the part that scares me. The not knowing. The fact that, either way, we can't go back and test the other version now. We are stuck with this one. The world where we kept choosing fear dressed up as consideration. He looked out at the city lights, each window a tiny box of someone else's life, each one full of its own could-have-beens. So where does that leave us? He asked quietly. There was no romance in the way he said it, no movie script certainty. Just a man trying to understand how to stand in the truth without destroying the delicate peace they'd spent years building. I tell you I loved you. You tell me you loved me. We both realize we wasted an obscene amount of time protecting each other from a pain we invented in our heads. Now what? On the other end, He heard her footsteps, soft, uneven, pacing across what he imagined was a living room. When she spoke again, her tone was filled with an exhausted kind of courage, the sound of someone standing in front of an emotional mirror they'd avoided for too long. "Now," she said slowly, "I have to admit something I really don't want to say out loud. Especially not to you." She paused, and he could practically feel her squeezing her eyes shut, forcing the words out. "When you texted me tonight, my first instinct was hope. This huge, ridiculous wave of hope I did not authorize. Like my heart didn't get the memo about my life's complications." His grip on the phone tightened. "And your second instinct?" he asked gently. The answer mattered. Maybe more than anything had in a long time. "My second instinct," she whispered, "was panic. Because there's something you don't know about me right now. Something I've been hiding even from the people closest to me. Something that makes this," her voice cracked, "this possibility between us so much more fragile than you realize." She drew a shaky breath, gathering herself. "If I tell you, I don't get to take it back. And I don't know if I'm ready to see the look on your face, even if it's over the phone." He straightened, heart drumming against his ribs. "Sandy," he said softly, "whatever it is, I'd rather know you completely than love some edited version of you that isn't real. I can handle the truth." He hesitated, knowing how often that promise was made and broken in their world. "And if I can't handle it alone, we'll handle it together. That's kind of the point, isn't it?" There was a soft, broken laugh. "You say things like that and you wonder why it was so easy to fall in love with you," she murmured. Another pause, longer this time. He could picture her standing there, staring at a dark window, her reflection layered over the night, battling between self-protection and the desperate, human hunger to finally be seen. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath, but the words were so sharp they cut through the line like glass. "Keanu, I didn't just build a life. I'm in the middle of trying not to watch it fall apart. I've been sick. Really sick. And I've been hiding it from everyone. If you're coming into my heart now, you need to know you might be walking straight into a storm I'm not sure I'll make it out of." For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. The word sick echoed in his chest like a gunshot in an empty room, louder than anything else she'd said that night. The city beyond his window blurred, the light smearing into streaks as his eyes stung. "What do you mean, sick?" he asked quietly, but there was a tremor in his voice he couldn't disguise. He wasn't afraid of illness itself. He had sat in hospitals, watched monitors beep, learn how to hold the hand of someone hooked up to too many machines. What terrified him was the idea of her, facing any of that alone. She hesitated, and in that pause he could hear the weight of months, maybe years, of silence. "I mean," she said slowly, "that about a year ago I got a diagnosis I have no idea how to say without sounding dramatic. I mean I've been going to doctors and pretending it's just routine check UPS when people ask where I've been. I mean, I've been losing pieces of myself quietly while trying to make jokes on camera so nobody notices." Her voice wobbled on the last word. "I didn't want to be the sick one, you know? The one everyone looks at with sad eyes and lowered voices." He rose from his chair without realizing it, the urge to go to her so strong it was almost physical. He paced toward the window, then back again, gripping the phone like it was the only solid thing left. "What did they say?" he asked, softer now, forcing his voice to be the calm she didn't have. "What are you dealing with?" He braced himself, feeling the old familiar dread coil in his stomach, the one that whispered, "Not again. Not another person I love." But he kept his tone steady, because this wasn't about his ghosts, it was about hers. There was a rustle on the line, a small, tired sigh. It started with fatigue, she said. Then weird pain. Then tests. More tests. Words I had to Google in the car because I didn't want to cry in front of the doctors. She let out a hollow laugh. I'm not dying tomorrow. It's not like that. I'm not trying to be theatrical. But it's serious enough that everything about my future looks different now. I have good days where I almost forget, and bad days where getting out of bed feels like climbing out of a well. Her voice thinned. On the bad days, I look at my son and wonder if he's going to have to be braver than any kid should ever have to be. He closed his eyes, fighting the surge of emotion that rushed up his throat. Sandy, he murmured, and there was so much in that one word: grief, empathy, anger at the cruelty of timing, of biology, of life. Why didn't you tell me? Or anyone? He knew the answer. In some ways, he understood the instinct to protect others from your pain. But hearing her confess it like this made it feel less like strength and more like a quiet kind of self-destruction. Because I didn't want to become a project, she said bluntly. I didn't want people hovering, tiptoeing, treating me like a fragile thing that might break if they laugh too loud. I've spent my whole life trying to be the person who fixes things, who makes it easier for other people to breathe. I didn't know how to switch roles. She blew out a slow breath. And then you text me that you're in love with me, and part of me feels like I'm in some ridiculous late-night movie, and the other part thinks, this is cruel. This is so cruel. He doesn't know he's confessing his love to a woman who doesn't know what her body is going to look like in 5 years. He stood still, letting her words settle. Fear, pride, shame, longing, it was all there, tangled together. Do you really think that's who I am? He asked gently. Someone who only signs up for the easy chapters. There was no accusation, only hurt that she had imagined this version of him, one who would turn away from difficulty when, in reality, difficulty had shaped most of his life. I've spent years walking next to people in the dark, even when I couldn't see the exit myself. You think I'd get your truth and run? Her answer came quickly, almost too quickly. No. That's the problem, she said, voice cracking. I know you wouldn't run. I know you. You'd stay. You'd rearrange your life. You'd show up at chemo and school recitals and nights when I can't stop shaking. You'd carry it all without complaint, the way you always do. And I am so scared of letting you do that. Because what if I get worse? What if you build your days around someone who might not be there in the way you deserve? She inhaled sharply. I don't want to be another ghost haunting your future, Keanu. I've seen what that's done to you. The honesty of it gutted him. For a moment he had to sit back down, the edge of the chair catching him as his knees threatened to give. You're talking like the ending's already written, he said softly. Like this is a tragedy and we are just filling in the details. He stared at his own reflection in the window, older, lined, shaped by years of loss but still standing. But life has been writing tragedies around me for so long that I learned something important. You don't protect yourself from pain by avoiding love. You just trade one kind of hurt for another. The ache of loss for the slow suffocation of what if. She was quiet, but he could sense her listening, really listening, the way she always had when the jokes fell away. You say that like it's easy, she murmured. It's not, he said. It's the hardest thing. Every time I've opened my heart, I've known it could end in a hospital room or a phone call or a quiet, empty apartment. And sometimes it did. But you know what I regret, when I'm really honest. He swallowed. Not the people I loved and lost. I regret the love I never gave fully because I was scared. I regret the times I chose safety over truth. There was a soft sniffle on the other end, then a weary, honest confession. I don't know how to let someone love me when I feel broken, she said. I can play a woman who conquers the world with a smile. I can't seem to be her when the cameras are off and I'm sitting in a doctor's office staring at test results with words I can't pronounce. She laughed once, bitterly. It's humbling, you know, being the strong one until your own body humbles you. He leaned forward, his voice steady but threaded with warmth. You're not broken, he said. You're human. You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to be tired. The woman who brings coffee to the crew at 5 a.m. is the same woman who gets to cry in her car after a doctor's appointment. Both are you. Both are worthy of love. He took a breath. I don't want the highlight reel, Sandy. I want the whole movie. Bloopers, deleted scenes, hospital gowns, messy hair, all of it. She went silent again, and he imagined her leaning against a wall, eyes closed, fingers pressed to the bridge of her nose because it was all too much. And what if I let you in, she whispered, and you wake up one day and realize you've signed up for more pain than joy? What if I become the chapter you wish you could skip? Her voice broke completely on that last word. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had walked away, every time she told herself she was too much or not enough in the wrong ways. He shook his head, even though she couldn't see him. You don't get to predecide my regret for me, he said gently but firmly. That's not kindness. That's control dressed up as sacrifice. He let that sit between them for a second. You have always fought to give other people choice, the choice to be in your life as you are, not as they imagine you. Why won't you give me that same respect? Her breath hitched. The truth of it had landed. Because if I let you choose me like this, she said, I have to admit I still want to be chosen. And I promised myself I wouldn't want that anymore. Not after everything. Not after this. He could feel something shifting, the way it does right before a dam breaks. I'm choosing you with my eyes open, he said. I'm choosing the possibility of hospital corridors and sleepless nights and fear. But I'm also choosing the sound of your laugh in my kitchen, your kid making fun of my old movies, your presence in whatever time we get. I don't know how long that will be. None of us do. But I know this. I would rather have a shorter time with you in truth than a lifetime wondering what we could have been. On the other end, a muffled sob escaped before she could catch it. The armor was cracking. Years of performing strength, of holding everything together for everyone else, were giving way to something more raw and real. You make it sound so beautiful, she choked out. But there's nothing beautiful about me on the floor of my bathroom, too weak to stand. There's nothing cinematic about my kid looking at me like he's afraid to ask if I'm okay. He let the image hit him, didn't flinch away from it. You don't have to be beautiful for me to stay, he said softly. You just have to be you. The woman who once sat on a crappy trailer couch with me and confessed she wanted someone to hold her hand if the bus blew up. I'm still that guy, Sandy. The bus just looks different now. A long silence followed. Thick, uneven breathing, the occasional swallow, the small sounds of someone confronting a truth they'd spent months outrunning. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but there was a new thread in it, something like surrender, or maybe the very first tremor of courage. So what are you saying? She asked. That you want to walk into this with me? Into hospitals and uncertainty and my kid's complicated feelings and my own fear? You're willing to sign up for that, knowing it could break you. He thought of all the ways he'd been broken before, all the places he'd healed crooked but still functional. I'm saying I'm already broken in places, he answered. And I've learned that sometimes, When broken things touch, they don't shatter more. They fit. They make something new. I want to be there. Not as a hero. Not as a martyr. Just as a man who loves you and refuses to let you navigate this storm alone if I can help it. On the other end, there was a sharp inhale, like she'd been hit with something she didn't expect. Hope, painful and bright. She didn't speak right away. He let her have the silence, the space to sort through the terror and the longing. When she finally did, her voice sounded smaller, younger, like the woman she had been on that first film set, before the world had taught her to armor up. "Then I have to tell you the rest," she whispered. "Because if you're still standing there after you hear this, then maybe I'll believe you really mean it. Maybe I'll believe I'm not asking too much." She paused, and in that tiny hesitation his heart clenched. The doctors didn't just warn me about my future. They warned me about something else, something I've been pretending I can ignore. If you walk into this with me, you're not just facing my illness, Keanu. Her breath shuddered out of her. You're facing the possibility that the one thing you've secretly wanted most, the life you never got to have, might be the very thing I can never give you. For a moment, he didn't understand. There were so many things he'd lost, so many futures that had been taken from him, that it could have been anything. Then her voice, thin and careful, carried the truth. "They don't know if I'll be able to carry again," she said. "They don't even know how my body's going to handle the next few years, let alone pregnancy. There are treatments that help me. Those same treatments might make it impossible. The doctors talk about preserving quality of life like it's a line item on a budget." She let out a shaky breath. "And I keep thinking about you. About everything you've lost. About the family you never really got to build in the way you deserved. And I think, how dare I let him love me when I can't promise him the one thing his heart might want most?" The room around him seemed to go quiet in a different way. He sank back into the chair, elbows on his knees, phone pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. He thought about all the interviews he dodged, all the times people had asked him about settling down, kids, the next chapter. He thought about the daughter he never got to raise, the life that had flickered and gone out before it had even begun. It was true, there had been a quiet, unspoken ache for a family, for small feet on hardwood floors and messy breakfasts and ordinary chaos. But there was something else too, a deeper, older ache to simply not lose one more person he loved because he'd been too afraid to show up fully. "You think that's what I've wanted most?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. "A biological child?" He let the question hang there without judgment. "I've wanted a chance at a life that feels honest. A home that doesn't disappear when the movie wraps. A place to put all this love that's been sitting in my chest with nowhere to go." He swallowed. "Yes, I wanted a family. I still do. But family isn't just DNA, Sandy. It never has been for me." She was quiet, listening. There was something fragile in her silence, like thin glass. "You already have a son," he continued gently. "He's yours. That makes him a miracle, not a complication. Walking into your life would mean walking into his too. Sharing that responsibility. Earning his trust. I don't see that as something less than a dream, like some consolation prize. I see it as sacred." He paused, steadying his breath. "If my body never creates another child, but I get to love you and help raise a kid who already exists in your world, that isn't losing a dream. It's rewriting it." A small, broken sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered. "Like it's just a choice. Like it's not this huge, messy knot of fear and guilt and worse." "It is messy," he said. It's terrifying. You're sick. You're a mom. I'm me. He let a hint of wryness slip into his tone. We are both public in ways that make private life complicated. This isn't a fairy tale where everything magically lines up. It's two middle-aged people with scars trying to figure out if they're allowed to want something big and real.